Last week, Alexei Navalny obviously died.
I listened to his wife on Radio 4 this morning when I drove in. Yulia.
I left it on for Blue. Well, I listened to the
I
start.
leave it on for Mabel as well.
Alexei Navalny died last week in an Arctic prison with the very sinister name.
Penal Colony 6.
Or Polar Wolf.
Wow.
As it's also called. Polar Wolf. Off. It looks absolutely as terrifying and sinister as that name sounds. Both sound terrifying. Penal Colony 6 and aka Polar Wolf.
Yeah, right.
Off. So the official word from the Kremlin is that he died after keeling over after a walk.
A walk.
And
yeah,
falling down. Okay, Kremlin. Though there is footage of Navalny in the days before his death where he seems to have been in pretty good spirits. So I don't know how a man goes from that to suddenly keeling over and having a fall and dying. So yes, we don't know. We don't know. So did Putin actually order Navalny to be killed? I mean, most likely.
Yes. I don't think there's much of a question about that.
No, I think definitely Putin murdered him, because it's like, in which way? If you lock somebody up in a prison like that and deprive them of everything and then they die, you have killed them. I guess some people are like, it's not the most opportunistic time for Navalny to have died because it's like right before the election. Not that anybody apart from Putin is going to win and there's all these distractions. I don't know if he thought about it that much. Either way, he murdered him. That is without a shadow of a doubt, obviously. So Navalny, we've talked about him before on the show, definitely. And I think we talked about him as well in our 2 parts that we did on the poisonings, the Salisbury poisoning, and also the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. But basically, Navalny came out about 10 years ago as Putin's main opposition and most high profile opposition. And I was listening to quite a lot of profiles about him over the last couple of days. And I think the thing that people are saying set him out the most and will make him quite hard to replace, because there is other opposition, but they typically tend to live as dissidents in other countries, is that he was really funny and really charismatic. And a lot of people saying you don't typically see that in Russian freedom fighters, or however you want to describe him, dissidents, oppositions. They're usually quite stern and stoic and serious. But Navalny, right up until his death, he was at a court hearing a couple of days before his death, and even he was making the judge laugh and stuff like this. So he was a very witty guy. So I think that will prove quite hard to replace, unfortunately. But this was a matter of time before Navalny was killed. When he first came onto the scene, he was doing very dangerous things, calling out cronyism and corruption in the Russian state. And I don't know if you remember, do you remember when they threw a bunch of green ink on him at a protest to humiliate him, and it stained his face? But he carried on talking and all of that. They'd beaten him up multiple times. And then, of course, they poisoned him 2 years ago with Novichok. And somehow he survived a poisoning with the nerve agent Novichok. There is that very harrowing footage that somebody filmed of him on the plane after he's been poisoned, and he's just screaming. It's not even screaming. It's like how a wounded animal would sound. It is absolutely horrific. And he obviously went to Germany to be treated. Once he was treated, everybody told him, do not go back to Russia. Stay here, stay in Europe, stay somewhere else and continue to do it. And he actually said that he didn't want to live his life as a dissident just living abroad, because he felt like he could only have minimal impact on what was going on in Russia if he did that. So I guess in equal measures, bravely and foolishly for his own life, he went back to Russia, and he was obviously immediately arrested and thrown in that prison in the Arctic Circle, which is
on terrorism charges.
Yes,
because
on terrorism charges.
Made a film.
Yes, about all of the cronyism and everything. And obviously since his death, there have been lots of demonstrations. People very much at their own risk doing this, because defying Putin is obviously not a great idea there. And there's absolutely freezing temperatures as well, and a huge police presence. People are still going and laying flowers for Navalny at, interestingly, a memorial site that Putin himself erected for the victims of Stalin. And it's very interesting that that's where people are choosing to go to lay flowers for Navalny. And of course, there have been hundreds and hundreds of arrests off the back of that. So I guess the question that a lot of people are asking now is what can you do? What can you do to Putin? What can anybody actually do? And I think the problem is that obviously in the immediacy after the war started in Ukraine, the West heavily sanctioned Russia. But it doesn't really seem that those sanctions have massively worked. They haven't really hurt Putin in the way that I think we hoped that it would. And actually, I only sort of realized this when I was in India, is that they're actually really unpopular, the sanctions, particularly in the developing world, like in India and like in Africa. And it's not because people don't care about what's going on in Ukraine, but it's interestingly because the sanctions have really slowed down the rate of growth and hit the economies of those countries really hard. So what's sad is that we've sort of put in place all these sanctions, but they haven't disproportionately hurt Russia. Yeah. They've actually had a wave effect where they've really hurt developing countries. So that's kind of also what Putin wants, because he wants the Indias, the Africas, the South American countries of the world, the BRIC countries, if you will, to side with him so that he can have this sort of new world order in which he is running it alongside China, India, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of what's happening, because those countries are getting pissed off with the West because of the sanctions, because they're hurting them.
But that's my friend Katia, who's Russian. That's exactly what she said. She was like, it's not hurting him, it's hurting the diabetics who can't get their drugs.
Yeah.
And like, it's making no difference.
No, it's not. And I think that's the challenge now, is like, okay, we tried sanctions. No one's going to invade Russia. So what do you do? It's very, very difficult. And, if you watch, and I did watch, the almost 2.5 hour interview that he did with Tucker Carlson last month, so before Navalny died, and he makes it very clear in there. He says several times during that interview that he essentially wants a new world order that is run by Russia and China rather than America. And he makes it very clear that that's what his aim is. How realistic that is, I don't know, but who can oppose him? I don't know. So it's scary stuff. And yeah, I think also when you talk about countries like India, elections are coming up in May in India. I saw the full fervor of that when I was there over the last couple of weeks. And if Modi wins again, that's it. It's game over. I wouldn't put it past him to do some sort of Xi Jinping situation and make himself prime minister or president for life. He's been in power for 10 years now. And during that time, he has significantly made the situation in India worse. Yes, economically, the situation is still good. I argue that it could have been much better in the hands of somebody else. But the religious hatred that is bubbling up in India that didn't used to exist is down to Modi 100%. The good thing is in the South, he doesn't win any seats. He hasn't won a single seat in Tamil Nadu. I feel like that I'm proud of, because he's a religious fanatic. But I will just give you one example, Hannah, of how ludicrous the things that he is saying are. When I was in India, there was a lot of protests being shown. There's a lot of protests going on. The farmers are very unhappy in Punjab, but there was one particular protest. And I didn't understand what they were talking about. So I asked my uncle, and he was like, oh, and this is the story. A Hindu nationalist organization linked with the BJP. So this is their whole game. It's like super, super ultra Hindu nationalism, suppression of all other minorities, particularly the Muslim population, etc. But this group has launched a court petition that is actually going to be heard in the Calcutta High Court today, based on 2 lions that are currently living in a West Bengal state zoo. So their beef is, so this group is called VHP, and their beef is that it's a male lion and a female lion living in a shared enclosure. The female lion is called Sita, which is a Hindu name. It's featured very highly, like it's the goddess that is featured in the Diwali story, for example. The male lion is called
Muhammad.
Akbar. Akbar. Good guess. And shares the name with a Mughal emperor whose reign in India lasted during like the 14th century. And they are incensed that you would have Sita and Akbar sharing a cell, cohabiting as a couple, as they call it, in a zoo. They're lions, and they are demanding that the name of Akbar be changed to a Hindu name. And that is what these people are protesting about.
And they're taking to the streets about this?
Yes.
Wow. I thought the French were bad.
I want to stress that this is a small fanatical group. And also, I don't know whether Modi will win again. He is losing support because the cost of living crisis, everything post-COVID, it's hitting, has hit India just as hard as anywhere else. And then obviously the sanctions is making everything worse. So people are struggling to feed their families just as they are in this country. And so when they see things like this happening, he's losing support because people are like, this is fucking ridiculous. So I do hope that he continues to do things like this because I actually think it will go against him. But the problem is that he wins in big states like Uttar Pradesh, where there is like a lot of poverty and a lot of like religious mania because people want a scapegoat, etc., etc. But the problem is then states where they didn't vote for him, they still suffer under his his rule. So yeah, I just wanted to give an example of just how fucking batshit things are right now.